friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori. Today I'm very excited to talk to you about my experience reading Empire of Silence by Christopher Ruocchio. This is book one in his acclaimed sci-fantasy series Sun Eater, and it's been on my TBR, as you guys know, for a long time. Shout out to Zin, who has been waiting patiently for me to read this series for like 2 years. It's fine. But I have officially read Empire of Silence, and I wanted to come on here and share a little bit about my thoughts and whether or not I think that, at least in book one, it lives up to the hype. Now, I'm not going to try and talk about the series as a whole at this point because I have only read book one. So don't worry if you haven't read the book. I am not planning on getting into any kind of heavy specific spoilers. I will be talking about my experience, my thoughts on the pacing of the book, the world building, the characters, my general enjoyment of it, and whether or not I will be continuing the series. A wise man once told me that flesh was the cheapest resource in the human universe, and that life spends more easily than gold. I laughed when I heard that, and denied him. I was a fool to do so. How little I knew. So let's start with the bare bones of what this story is. This book really is the epitome of epic sci-fantasy storytelling. I know that it's sci-fi, but it has a lot of similar structure and storytelling style to a lot of epic fantasy, which is why I think it crosses over between readers so incredibly well. And at the same time, there's enough futuristic world building and sci-fi elements to this story that I do think that it will please a lot of the sci-fi nerds out there as well. Now, one of the things that I find really interesting about this story is that it is an epic told from a first-person narration, and that protagonist that is doing the telling is Hadrian Marlowe. Now, in the very beginning of the book, and this isn't a spoiler, it's called the Sun Eater series, is that Hadrian is giving us a framed narrative of how he got to where we are in the distant present. And he's telling us how he was responsible for this mass genocide on this planet, and that he is kind of reflecting back on all of the things that he's done in his life and the steps that he took that brought him to where we are now. So he gives us a little bit of a reflective opening, and then we are immediately shot back into his very early adulthood, where he is the privileged eldest son of House Marlowe. Hadrian is very closely related to royalty, so he has the best genes that money can buy. He has a lot of connections. He has a name that has a lot of weight in the galaxy, but at the same time, he's not very well thought of by his father, and he's not really sure if he's going to end up as his house's heir or not. And so we start off with this kind of very privileged character who's also struggling with never quite being good enough and not really knowing what his future is going to hold in regards to his family. Now, I want to talk about Hadrian as a protagonist a little bit because he carries the story. It is in his perspective that we are stuck through this entire 600 pages. And Hadrian, to me, is one of those protagonists that I feel like he is able to carry the story. I never felt like he was a character that kind of got lost in the story he was telling. I did feel like he had a lot of layers. He was a very nuanced protagonist. I did really appreciate that during his kind of coming of age storyline that we get, especially in the beginning of the book, it never loses that vast undertone. It's very clear from day one, and not just because of the framed narrative, but also because of the undertones of the story that Hadrian is telling and the way he's being brought up and the outer conflicts of his solar system, that there's going to be a very big conflict at stake here. This is a huge series, so obviously that's what we're expecting. And I think that Ruocchio does a really good job grounding us in a character who is in some ways an expected protagonist, but in other ways he slides into a different lane, I think, than a lot of epic story protagonists do. He's a linguist. He loves languages. He wants to learn. He doesn't want to be a warrior. He wants to go out and learn as much as he possibly can about the solar system and the peoples in it and the races in it. And I really like that kind of sociology/anthropology approach to a protagonist in a story like this, because it allows the author to bring in a ton of detail and a ton of world building lore without it feeling like the character has to go out of their way to explain what's going on or info dump. With Hadrian, it feels very natural because these are things that as a character, he's studying, he's really invested in, he's interested. He wants that as a future. He wants to be able to go out into the stars and learn as much as he can. I think that was a really well done way to incorporate a lot of world building with a character that feels very realistic, and it never crossed a boundary to where it felt like Hadrian was just telling things because we as the readers needed to know. So I gotta give Ruocchio a lot of kudos for that, because I think in a story like this that is that vast in scope, it can be very easy to fall into exposition dumps. I want to talk a little bit about Ruocchio's prose as well, because that was another thing that I really appreciated. I had heard about this book that it was very elevated prose. Some even described it as being dense. I don't know that I would go that far. I actually found it a lot more accessible than I was anticipating, which was kind of a pleasant surprise. I didn't find it hard to read. There's a lot of information. Ruocchio does have really beautiful prose and uses a lot of more elevated language, but it never feels overbearing. At least it didn't to me, which it was a refreshing surprise. And I really loved a lot of the way that Ruocchio digs into these themes with that beautiful prose. There are quite a few moments of reflection in this book, a lot of reflection that does borderline navel-gazing a bit, but it didn't bother me enough that it would throw me out of the story. I was just like, okay, well, Hadrian's in his thoughts and in his feels again, which was fine, and I wasn't really bothered by it as much as I might have been if, again, some of the other elements of the story were less than they were. The side characters of this story add so much, and this is something I always look for in a story that has this kind of epic scope is, yes, okay, we have a protagonist, they're very detailed, layered, and nuanced, especially as a first-person narration, but what is the side cast doing? Is the side cast just a bunch of cardboard cutouts, or do we have characters that are adding to the depth of our main character and to the world at large? And in this case, I did really relate to a lot of the side characters. There was actually one of the side characters that I, within moments of meeting them, was like, I would die for this person. No hesitation whatsoever. I really appreciated how much variety we got in the side cast as well. He really gives us a smorgasbord of characters, everything from the very bottom tier of society in this world all the way up to the palatines or the nobles. And we get such a varied look at the world and the effects that it's having on the people that live in it. Despite the fact that we're in Hadrian's head the whole time, it never felt like we were stuck in his perspective. And that's really easy to do, I think, when you have a book with first-person narration, is it can feel like you're kind of trapped in their head and you don't get the perspectives of the people around them because you're limited so much by the protagonist. There were actually moments in this book where I almost forgot that we were in a first-person narration, which is an incredibly impressive feat for me, at least, because first-person is usually something that I'm kind of 50-50 with. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Now, in terms of the world building, this has a lot of similarities to other things that I've read. There isn't, in terms of especially the beginning, and as we're getting into Hadrian's more noble society and we're seeing things from the view at the top, it feels very similar to a lot of other epic stories that I've read. I have not read the books that are the primary influences on Ruocchio. I know he is a massive fan of Gene Wolfe, and he's also grew up reading Dune. And from what I've heard from other people, they are very strong influences and that you can really see them in this first book especially, and it kind of grows into its own voice more as you go through the series. But for me, not having read any of the influential books on Ruocchio as a young writer, I didn't have any of those roadblocks, so to speak, or those hiccups where I wasn't noticing anything where I was like, oh, this reminds me of this other book. But just kind of in general, it has a very familiar epic opening where we have this young man who's in a coming of age kind of scene, and he's at odds with his father, and he's at odds with his brother, and his parents aren't really getting along that well, and he's really good with a sword. I will say one of the things I appreciated immediately about this book is that while Hadrian is fairly smart in some areas, he also makes a lot of flawed assumptions and opinions about other people and about himself. He over exaggerates, I think, some of his talents a lot in the beginning and sort of has to be broken down and get a reality check through a big portion of this novel. I think what really proved to have the most potential for me as a reader in this story is actually the setup of the larger political conflict within the series, which is between humans and the alien race, the Sealson. And that isn't a spoiler because it's introduced right away in the story. Mankind has been at war with this alien race for a long time, and they don't know that much about them. So again, there's kind of that familiar storytelling element there as well. That's where, as the book progresses, I really found that I personally was being hooked. I was so invested in learning more about that conflict and learning more about this alien race. And as Hadrian starts to learn more and more about them, I found myself getting more and more invested in the series as a whole. Now, this is a first book in a big series, and it is a setup book. And a lot of readers talk about first book setups as a negative thing. I don't. When I go into epic series like this, I assume that the first book is going to be doing its job and setting up the rest of the series. That is the function, typically speaking, of a first book. And you want to see that setup done in a way that makes you excited to get into the meat of the series, that makes you excited to keep going, to keep reading, to keep learning about the characters, about the world building, about the conflicts. And Empire of Silence, I think, does that really well. It does struggle in that area in a different way because of the pacing. The pacing was my biggest critique of this first book. In the beginning, the pacing was pretty good. I felt like it was ramping up the tension and the intrigue in a way that really had me engaged, and it was good. I would say the middle, probably even more than a third of this book, really struggled with pacing. The chapters were very jarring, very suddenly, and it would leap from event to event without really anything connecting them in between, and sometimes it would jump ahead too far where I was like, wait, I'm sorry, we needed to finish what we were doing a minute ago and now we're just jumping forward. And that was a little off-putting for me as a reader, and I did find it to be a little bit of a slog in the middle because of that. And it also reduced some of my emotional investment in some of the events that were happening in the middle, just because we were jumping around and being jarred so much by the pacing that it kind of obstructed my ability to really immerse and care about what was going on. The first third was good. The middle part was a real struggle for me in a lot of ways. The last third of this book makes the Brandon Sanderlanche look tame by comparison, not in terms of action, but in terms of the tension, the reveals, and the way everything we've been learning about the story up to this point just kind of blows wide open. And it leads into the rest of the series so powerfully. The final third of this book, hands down, is the best part of it, for me at least. I thought the first half, or the first third, was good, like I said before. The middle was a struggle, but that final third really had me gripped. I could not put it down. I wanted to know what happened. I wanted to learn more. And that was so satisfying as a reader, especially when you're coming into an epic, long series like this. it's a commitment, right? And it can be a little daunting and say, man, am I really going to buckle in for however many books this is going to be? I mean, there's 7 coming out in November, so it's already a pretty long series. How am I going to feel about this? Do I really want to put that much time into a big series like this? How am I going to feel about it? And by the last third of this book, I was buckled in for the series. I enjoyed a lot of the aspects up to that point, but the final third is where I really could see the vision of what this series was going to become, and that made me completely invested. So am I going to be continuing this series or not? Yes, absolutely going to be finishing this series. That last third of this book had me by the throat, you guys. There's some heavy content also in the last part of this book that I think was really well written. It didn't feel gratuitous, but it had such a weight to it. The kind of weight that really makes you appreciate the themes that are being explored in the story and look forward to how those themes are going to be expanded upon in future books. And Hadrian as a main character, I think he's fine at this point. I'm not head over heels, but I'm also not rejecting him as a main character, which is good. And I think this story really checks a lot of boxes for me personally in how it's being told, the themes that are being explored. One of the phrases that's used several times in this book is "fear is a poison." And to me, that just encapsulates so much of the themes, I think, that are strongly represented in this first book, because I'm always very interested in books that explore humanity being afraid of the things we don't understand, and humanity immediately rejecting or being fearful of or even being hostile towards things we don't understand or things that we feel threaten who we are and what we know. And I think this book delivers on that theme beautifully, and especially in that last third, the setup for how that theme is going to be just front and center stage through all the rest of Sun Eater makes me very excited to continue. So I will definitely be reading The Howling Dark next month. I'm so excited to keep going in this series. It is taking every ounce of willpower I have right now not to start book 2 because I am doing a read along with my patrons and my Discord friends, and I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait until June. It's going to happen. But that should give you an idea of how good that last third of the book was, because I really, really enjoyed it. And again, is this a perfect book for me? No, absolutely not. There are some tropes that I'm so familiar with at this point that they feel a little slow to me now, but I didn't dislike the way they were written. I do think that Ruocchio does a good job presenting those familiar tropes in a way that's still engaging. The middle section of this book was incredibly jarring in terms of the pacing, but it still introduced some characters that I really enjoyed reading about, and I'm excited to read more of. If you've been sitting on the fence and you're not sure if you want to try this book, this first book at least, but I'm going to kind of assume the series in general, is for people who like to really settle in with strong themes, with a character that reflects on the world around them in a way that really brings up a lot of thought-provoking commentary for you as a reader. And also, strong cast of characters. We're building towards some kind of a motley crew. There is a very powerful, larger political conflict going on. There's really interesting alien races in this book that are described so well, which is something that I always love when I'm reading something that has a more sci-fi bent. I want those creatures to be interesting. I want them to be different. I want them to be otherworldly, and Ruocchio delivers that in spades. If you've already read it and you're familiar with the series, I would love to know your thoughts down in the comments below. Please let me know, and I can't wait to continue this series and see what Ruocchio has in store for us in Howling dark. So that is my official review for Empire of Silence by Christopher Ruocchio, Book 1 in the Sun Eater saga. I hope you guys are having a fantastic week, and I hope you are also reading some fabulous new favorite reads, and I will see you in the next video.